Chapter 16. My Life and Work by Henry Ford, 1922. In a nutshell, continually refine your thinking power. Imagine something the world would really need, make it cheaply as possible, and sell it at the lowest price. My Life and Work takes us inside the mind of a person who managed to change the world, yet who lived in relative obscurity for the first 40 years of his life. This was a long time to develop skills, both personal and mechanical, that laid the foundation for a massive enterprise. Ford was that rare person, an inventor who went on to mass-produce his own invention. If you ever feel disheartened because you have an idea for a product or service for which you have been told there is no market, remember Ford's comment that there never is for new articles. He saw fear as the result of dependence on other people and circumstances, and in every area of his life, from the avoidance of debt to the work ethic that he held sacred, Ford was an expression of what Emerson called self-reliance. The vision. Described by his mother as a born mechanic, the greatest moment in Ford's childhood was seeing a road engine, a steam vehicle used to haul farm machinery. It was the first vehicle he'd seen not pulled by horses. Always tinkering, by age 15 he could fix almost any watch and seriously considered becoming a watch manufacturer. But the idea of the horseless carriage was too great, and without the support of his father, Ford began to build one in the workshop he'd constructed on the family farm. At 17, he began work as an apprentice machinist, qualifying before time, and rose through the ranks. In his spare time, he worked on a gasoline engine and dreamed of building a universal car that could transport people cheaply and reliably. In his 20s, he was inspired by a brief meeting with the inventor Thomas Edison. Despite virtually everyone at the time saying that electricity was the future, Edison told him to stick at his engine. Ford's employer offered him a major promotion on condition that he gave up his private obsession. His reaction? I had to choose between my job and my automobile. I chose the automobile, or rather I gave up the job. There was really nothing in the way of choice, for already I knew that the car was bound to be a success. I quit my job on August 15th, 1899, and went into the automobile business. And the reality. Without personal funds, Ford joined up with a group of investors to form the Detroit Automobile Company. He quickly found that they were more interested in quick profits than engineering a better machine, and after only a year and 20 cars, he resigned. 4 years later, the 40-year-old began the Ford Motor Company. It was capitalized at $100,000, and this time Ford owned a quarter of the stock. Over 1,700 cars were built in the first year of operation, and the Model A gained a reputation for reliability. The second year, giving in to pressure from business associates, Ford brought out 3 models and raised prices. The company sold fewer vehicles. He realized that he had to have ownership in order to have full control, and using income generated from sales, brought his holdings up over 50%, later increased to 100%. In 1908-09, the firm sold over 10,000 cars, and again there was pressure to expand the range. Ford went in exactly the opposite direction. One morning in 1909, he announced that the company would now sell only one model, the Model T. What's more, it would be available in only one color. Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, so long as it's black, were his now famous words. Success. While many believed that the car's low price would bring the firm's collapse, Ford himself expected the market to expand dramatically. It did. He started building the largest factory in the world, Highland Park, and production capacity leaped from 6,000 to 35,000 cars, while the number of staff merely doubled. By the early 1920s, the company employed 50,000 people and was turning out 4,000 cars a day. In 1921 alone, 5 million cars were produced. By the end of the decade, 15 million Model Ts would be run off the assembly line. This was the miracle of mass production. Universal demand. The first automobiles were considered a rich man's toy, sold on the basis of pleasure and status. Fords were advertised for their utility. Many people could justify the cost if it was used for travel to work or to carry the family around. The cars were also sold on the basis of simplicity of use, which gave rise to the saying, "Anyone can drive a Ford." It was price, though, that really made the Model T universal. In 1909-10, it had cost $950. 10 years later, it was selling for $355. How is this possible? Ford abhorred the idea of trying to get the highest price for the car. Instead, his strategy was to base prices on the cost of manufacture. If his factories could be made more and more efficient, the consumer would win. Like Sam Walton with his Walmart stores, Ford discovered that he could make more profits from selling greater numbers of the product at a lower price than selling fewer at a higher price. If you manage to sell a high-quality product cheaply via low-cost methods, you will be meeting a demand which is so large that it may be called universal. Ford wrote. Work and wages. As America's assembly lines grew in number, the prevailing wisdom became that repetitive work numbed the body and spirit. Earning a way above average $6 a day, Ford workers were less concerned. Henry Ford believed that high wages increased the stability of the workforce and helped the men to concentrate, knowing that their families were taken care of. It also allowed them to be consumers, not just for Ford cars, but for other goods and services that kept the economy buoyant. Ford's hiring methods were unusual. The firm wanted to know little more about prospective workers than their name, age, marital status, and whether they were willing to work. Not speaking English and having a criminal record were not a problem. It did not hire experts because they usually only knew what could not be done. Ford preferred fools who would rush in to tackle problems with an open mind. Blind people, deaf and dumb people, those with only one leg or arm, all were employed by Ford at the same wage as the able-bodied. He wrote, "I think that if an industrial institution is to fill its whole role, it ought to be possible for a cross-section of its employees to show about the same proportions as a cross-section of a society in general. We always have with us the maimed and the halt." Such an enlightened philosophy is taken for granted now, but it wasn't in the 1920s. The ideal of service. In the early days of the car industry, Ford points out, there was no after-sales service. Car makers were totally focused on selling rather than building a relationship with customers, and it was considered good business to charge a lot for spare parts because the owner had no choice but to buy them. Ford believed that the sale of a car was merely the beginning of a relationship with a buyer. He built his cars to last, but also made sure that parts were transferable across models, cheap and easy to install. This ideal of service might have seemed crazy to other manufacturers, but the trust it built up among the public was priceless. His early experience with investors demonstrated that the principle of return on the dollar often sabotaged the creation of an enterprise that would grow into something substantial. Businesses were not cash cows. They should offer something that made lives better, and if they achieved this, good returns would naturally flow. final comments. A major figure of the 20th century, Ford combined two traits often seen in the super-successful person: an original, far-reaching vision that carries with it the potential to change the world, and an obsessive attention to detail that can drive people mad. Ford's dark side included spying on managers and belief in conspiracy theories about Jewish bankers taking over America. He has also been ridiculed for the famous saying that history is bunk. This was his shorthand for the belief that education shouldn't be about remembering facts, but about teaching people how to think better. Despite how well he paid, Ford couldn't help noticing that most people chose jobs that enabled them not to have to think, while his admiration of Edison was based on the inventor's ability to think things through. His achievements are, of course, inspiring, but what message did Ford mean us to take from My Life and Work? Some comments late in the book about the concept of use perhaps provide the key. He counsels against worrying too much about savings and investments as we normally think of them. He says, "You are not saving when you prevent yourself from becoming more productive. You are really taking away from your ultimate capital. You are taking away the value of one of nature's investments." Refining your ability to think should be your investment priority. It always provides the best returns.